introduction to soil health, I'll do a bit of a tiny whiz tour of what I spoke about and a little bit about how that reflects on the work we do to improve the environment. So soil, I think we're aware, is incredibly valuable. It is a really slow process to be formed. About 1 centimetre of topsoil takes about 1,000 years to form, which kind of gives you a context at the rates that we're eroding it into our rivers. But that's a bit of a problem. It's not going to regenerate as quickly as we're losing it. In an agricultural setting, a really good proportion of the main components of soil is about 5% organic matter, 25% air pores full of air, 25% of water, and 45% of the mineral components, your sands, your clays, and all of that. It massively varies if you're on peatlands at the tops of the ground or if you're on a sand maca that's only just turning into soil. But in principle, in our terms, that's quite a good sort of balance. Within those different components, organic matter is incredibly important. That tiny percentage in the grand scheme, 5, 8, maybe a bit less, makes a huge difference to how healthy our soils are and how well they work in ecosystems and how they support our environment. So to look a little bit more in detail at those, the living organic matter, the dead organic matter, and really dead organic matter is often the terms that they use. So the living organic stuff would be our plant roots on the top, the living, and the bacteria and the fungi and all those things going on in the soils. The dead matter, the crop residues on the top, and manures, agricultural manures, that sort of thing that they might integrate into the soils. And the humus, the really dead, stabilised stuff, is what persists in the soil for a longer period, often helping to give you spongier soils and give you nutrient that can slowly release over a longer period of time. And there's a lovely little factoid for you. About a 1% increase of organic matter can hold around 75,700 litres of water per acre. And that's about half the size of a football pitch. So when we talk about helping farms to increase the organic matter in the soil, just think of that water holding capacity, both in a flood scenario and in current drought issues at the moment, what that really can do to help. And really importantly, with these living organic aspects, is what those living elements of carbon can do for the soil. Without them, our soils can become dead and friable and far more likely to blow away or run off into our watercourses. So I'm just going to do a quick bit more on this. So I don't think it's something everybody's learned as much about at school, perhaps. But you have your various different trophic levels. At the top, we have our plants that we all know about. They photosynthesize, grabbing carbon dioxide and things from the soil, the air, using the sun to power that photosynthetic process to make the nutrients that grows their own plants. And then they've got their roots plunging into the ground, binding all the soil together. They on their own struggle to access nutrient in the soil. So often, if we have a dead soil, we might need to spray fertilizers on them. We might need to put pesticides on to protect them from disease because they're a bit weakened in their immune systems. But if you have a healthy, thriving soil, your second trophic level down is going to have bacteria and fungi and other such things floating around the root area. And these are better able to access the nutrients in the soils. And they also they take some of the exudates coming off the roots of the plants. Our third trophic level is going to be our arthropods, nematodes, protozoas, other living things, that they come along and eat the bacteria and fungi. And their poo essentially is full of that rich nutrients that the other species are reaching, and that's readily available for the plant. And all the while, that second and third layer, they're making hyphae from the fungi, they're making all sorts of goos of their own, binding it together, a bit like yeast in bread. So if we have this really lovely, healthy soil full of organic matter that's feeding the life, and the life is then feeding the soils, we have a far more happy, functioning soil. And you have then your fourth and your fifth, your larger things like your worms and your spiders and your birds and your moles, all of which feeds into our bigger trophic levels that we look at on the on the top of the surface of the ground, so your birds and everything in the sky are still quite reliant on what's going on in the soils under our feet. So I've dwelled a lot on the living aspects of soil, largely because it's one of the things we can influence the most. But I'll briefly touch on the other aspects that make up our soils. Minerals, around about 45% of your soil. You've got your sand, your silt and your clays typically, sand being the largest particles down through to clay that are the smallest. And they themselves influence how easy water can infiltrate through the soil profile. Open sand, you know, at the beach you pour a cup of water on, it'll run away quickly. Clay and silt, if you step on it on a muddy day, you're going to compact it hard like a nice ceramic vase or something, and water's not going to get through. So that is a large aspect of what makes up how a soil is going to respond to weather and what we do with it. Alongside the physical properties, they have something called their cationic exchange capacity. So their abilities as particles to hold on to the positively charged nutrients in the soils. So sand and silt aren't very good at doing this, but clay has a negative charge. So all the nutrients needed to feed the plants bind quite well to clay. So they're less likely to be leached away in a clay soil. Whereas if we have lots of nutrient added to silt in sand, that's far more likely to leach away, resulting in pollution more likely, and also poorer plants less able to sustain themselves because the nutrients gone. What we can do to help with that is integrate more organic matter, because organic matter, like clay, combine those important nutrients. But in terms of actually changing the composition of the minerals, that's quite hard to do. There's some great nifty ways at looking at texture in your soils, going out, digging a hole and rubbing it between your hands. But with a limited amount of time, there's not much point going into the detail. But key things to remember about the different types of minerals is how they have an impact on how well they hold on to organic matters, their cationic exchange capacity about the nutrients holding, and their physical structure. Are they more likely to be compressed and stay compressed over time, or are they more likely to spring back more easily? And just to wrap that all up, a really nice analogy, looking at your living, healthy, happy soils that have a great balance of organic living things with a lovely amount of air, water, and living species, is comparing bread as our living soil, full of happy and healthy soil, and flour as our dead, inert soil, which maybe been turned over too many times with a plough or left bare too long to dry out and sprayed with chemicals quite frequently. If you take a bowl of flour and you to blow on it, all that flour is going to blow off into the atmosphere. And if you think about Lincolnshire, it's really big, flat, sandy soils with very few hedges. That's what happens. Your soil is often blown away quite easily. If you pour water onto that flour, it's going to kind of puddle and form a bit of a crust on the top. It's not going to infiltrate down through that soil profile. So you're not restocking your aquifers. You're not providing future water when it gets droughty, but you're causing a crust on the top that then runs off into your waterway, taking sediment, smothering your fish spawn, taking the nutrient, the phosphate bound to the sediment or whatever's on the top, so causing eutrophication. Whereas your spongy breads, full of yeast and living bacteria and fungi and all of that goodness, you pour water on it, it's spongy. You pour water on it, it doesn't flow off into the watercourse, it recharges the water levels in that bread, and it's just so much more resilient. So when we talk about healthy soils, just have that image in your mind. And that's pretty much it, all I wanted to say about the main components that make up a soil. And we kind of touched on why it's important as we went through, but just as a nice quick summary, and I'm looking over here because I can't read my notes here. The infiltration of water, absolutely key in what we do as a rivers trust. We talk about weatherproofing our farms where you have water stored for drought periods and reduction in flood risk during flood periods. A healthier, spongy soil, it's less prone to compaction where water won't infiltrate and there's more pore space to take that water. Compaction If you've got healthier soils with microorganisms binding it together and organic matter mixed through your minerals, it's more likely to sponge up again. It's more resilient if you mistreat it a bit with your heavy working machinery and such. In plant health, well, a healthier plant doesn't need as many chemical inputs, and it's better able to plunge its roots into the ground and help stabilise the soils like we want in our buffer strips along water courses. And it's better able to feed us if we have a healthier soil feeding those plants. The nutrition value greatly increases, which is something that society is having to look at now with our depleting soils and the way we've been growing crops for so long. Healthier roots, they're better able to plunge into the soil profile. You know, there's a lot of stewardship schemes out there looking at using healthy rooting systems to improve our soils. But it works both ways. If you have a poor soil, that plant's going to struggle to root anyway. Climate regulation. If we have a healthy soil, then the plants are going to be healthier. They're going to lock down carbon through photosynthesis. Their transpiration on a large scale cools our atmosphere and shade the soil. And they really contribute to the wider ecosystem. So it's incredibly important that we look at our soils, and I think we're all aware of that. And to what level of information you guys have, I'm not entirely sure, but certainly it's something we talk a lot in the trust. And plenty of what we do working with farmers to help encourage them with their practices can influence that. The key regenerative principles includes integration of livestock often into arable systems, putting more organic matter into the soil that way. Minimizing how much we turn the soil over, that causes oxidization and breaks down the living bacteria going on in the soil if you turn it too much. Maintaining living roots as best as possible, protecting the soil surface and introducing diversity. So when we look at putting little pockets of trees and hedges in, it's absolutely perfect. Aeration is one of the things we've done in the past, working with farmers. But if I can find ways in the future to help work with farmers around all those other principles as well, I'd really like to. And I think that's pretty much the key points. I've sort of sped through it. I hope that was a nice little introduction to soil health.